Sometimes the safest place you'll ever find is behind a door you almost didn't open. The knock came again, softer this time, but somehow heavier, like it carried the weight of something unspoken, something urgent that refused to be ignored. Elijah Brooks was already awake by then, lying still in the dark, eyes open, listening. 2:03 a.m. The red digits on the alarm clock glowed faintly across the room. He didn't move right away. Not because he was afraid, but because he had learned, over years of raising a child alone, that every sound in the night deserved a second of thought before action. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant rush of a car passing on wet pavement outside. Then the knock came again. 3 taps. Careful, not desperate, but close. Elijah exhaled slowly and pushed himself up from the couch, the old springs beneath him giving a quiet creak. He glanced toward the small bedroom down the hall. The door was slightly open. No movement. Nia was still asleep. Good. He crossed the living room barefoot, each step deliberate, his hand brushing the edge of the kitchen counter as he passed, grounding himself in the familiar layout of the space. When he reached the door, he didn't open it right away. He rested his palm against the wood, feeling the faint vibration of the world on the other side. Then, in one smooth motion, he unlocked it and pulled it open just enough to see. The hallway light flickered overhead, casting a pale, uneven glow. And there she was. A woman stood just outside his door, shoulders slightly hunched against the cold, her coat damp from rain that still clung in small dark patches along the fabric. One heel was missing its tip, the other barely holding on, like it had carried her farther than it was meant to. Her hair, once carefully styled, now fell loose around her face, strands sticking lightly to her skin. But it wasn't the way she looked that made Elijah pause. It was her eyes. Sharp. Alert. And tired in a way that didn't come from lack of sleep. She didn't step forward. Didn't try to explain. She just held his gaze, steady, like she had already decided this was the last door she would knock on tonight. When she spoke, her voice was low, controlled, but edged with something fragile beneath it. I need somewhere safe. Elijah didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved once, quick and subtle, down the hallway behind her. Empty. No footsteps. No voices. Just the echo of distant rain hitting the building's exterior. He looked back at her. She wasn't shaking. Not visibly. But he recognized the stillness. The kind that comes when someone is holding themselves together by choice, not by comfort. He opened the door wider. You alone? He asked, his voice quiet enough not to carry. She nodded once. No hesitation. No performance. Just truth. Elijah stepped aside, leaving space. Not rushing her. Not reaching for her. Just making room. She hesitated for half a second, as if stepping over the threshold meant crossing something more than just a doorway. Then she walked in. The warmth of the apartment met her immediately, soft and steady, carrying the faint scent of detergent and last night's coffee. Elijah closed the door behind her with a quiet click and turned the lock. The sound echoed louder than it should have. He watched her take in the room without moving her head much. The small couch. The folded blanket. The child's backpack near the chair. The kind of details that didn't belong in her world, but made sense here. He reached for a clean towel draped over the back of a chair and held it out to her. You can dry off, he said simply. No questions. Not yet. She took it slowly, her fingers brushing the fabric like she wasn't used to being handed something without expectation attached. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, the air shifted. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just enough to be felt. Elijah glanced once more toward the hallway where his daughter slept, then back at the woman standing in his living room. Whoever she was, whatever she had run from, it could wait until morning. Tonight, she had asked for safety. And he had already answered. Elijah moved through the kitchen with quiet efficiency, the kind that came from repetition, from years of doing everything alone without making a show of it. He filled a glass with water from the tap, then set a kettle on the stove, turning the knob just enough to bring a low flame to life. The soft click and hiss settled into the background, steady and controlled. Behind him, he could feel her presence without needing to look, the way a room shifts when someone unfamiliar stands inside it. She had not taken off her coat yet. Not fully. It still hung on her shoulders, heavy with damp, as if she was not ready to let go of whatever had brought her here. He slid the glass across the counter toward her. "Drink," he said, not unkindly. She stepped closer, slow, measured, like she was testing the ground with each movement. Her fingers wrapped around the glass, and for a moment, she just held it, feeling the weight, the temperature, something real. Then she took a sip. Small. Careful. Elijah turned back to the stove, opening a cabinet and pulling out a plain ceramic mug. No logos. No decoration. Just something that had lasted. He poured hot water once the kettle began to hum and dropped in a tea bag, letting it steep without rush. Silence settled again, but it was different now. Less sharp. Less guarded. The kind of silence that allows breathing to slow. He glanced at the clock on the wall. Still early enough that the night had not decided whether to end or linger. "You got somewhere you can call?" he asked after a moment, his voice low, steady. Not pressing. Just offering a direction. She shook her head before he even finished the question. Not dramatic. Not defensive. Just a quiet no. Elijah studied her then, not in a way that made her feel seen too much, but enough to understand. Her clothes were expensive. That was obvious. The stitching. The fabric. The kind of details you notice when you have spent your life fixing things instead of buying them new. But none of it mattered in the way she stood now. The posture was different. Less controlled. Like someone who had been holding a straight line for too long and finally let it bend. He set the mug in front of her. "Careful. It is hot." She gave a faint nod and wrapped both hands around it, letting the heat settle into her skin. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. Not enough for most people to notice. Enough for him. Elijah leaned back slightly against the counter, crossing his arms loosely, keeping space between them. "You do not have to tell me everything," he said. "But I need to know if anyone is coming here looking for you." The question hung in the air, simple but clear. Not suspicion. Responsibility. She looked up at him then, really looked this time, like she was measuring something she had not expected to find. "No," she said, her voice steadier now. "No one knows I am here." Elijah held her gaze for a second longer, then nodded once. That was enough for now. He reached for a folded blanket from the back of the couch and placed it within her reach, not handing it directly, just setting it where she could take it if she wanted. "You can sit," he added. "You look like you have been on your feet too long." She hesitated again, but this time it was different. Less about fear. More about unfamiliarity. Then she lowered herself onto the edge of the couch, careful, like she was not used to resting in places that were not her own. The blanket stayed in her lap, untouched for a moment, before she slowly pulled it around her shoulders. Elijah turned off the stove and dimmed the kitchen light slightly, softening the room. He did not ask her name. Not yet. Some things come easier when they are not demanded. He walked to the hallway and paused just before the bedroom door, listening. Nia's breathing was steady. Even. Safe. He closed the door a little more, just enough to keep the quiet contained, then returned to the living room. The woman had taken another sip of tea. Her grip was less tight now. Her eyes were still alert, but no longer searching every corner of the room. Elijah took a seat in the chair across from her, not too close, not too far, positioning himself where he could see both her and the front door without making it obvious. He rested his hands on his knees, posture relaxed but ready. For a while, neither of them spoke. The rain outside softened to a distant rhythm, tapping lightly against the windows like it had run out of urgency. Inside, the apartment held steady. Warm. Quiet. Uncomplicated. And for the first time since she had stepped through that door, she exhaled without holding anything back. The quiet did not break all at once. It shifted, inch by inch, like the room itself was learning how to breathe around two strangers who had decided, without saying it out loud, to trust the same silence. Charlotte sat with the mug still between her hands, the warmth now settled deep enough that her fingers no longer trembled against the ceramic. Her eyes moved slowly across the apartment, not searching anymore, but noticing. The bookshelf against the far wall held more children's books than anything else, their spines worn, some bent at the corners like they had been opened too many times to count. A small drawing was taped unevenly to the side of the refrigerator, bright crayon lines forming a house, a sun, and two figures holding hands. One tall. One small. Both smiling in a way that did not need to be explained. She lingered on that for a moment longer than she meant to. Elijah followed her gaze but said nothing. He had seen that look before. Not curiosity. Not judgment. Something quieter. Recognition, maybe. Or the absence of something she had never quite had. He leaned back slightly in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight, steady and familiar. "You can take the couch," he said after a moment, his voice calm, like it was already decided. "It pulls out. Clean sheets are in the closet." Charlotte looked at him, as if the simplicity of the offer needed a second to settle. "And you?" she asked, not out of politeness, but because she had not yet learned the rules of this place. Elijah gave a small shrug. "I have had worse spots," he said, nodding toward the chair he sat in. There was no pride in it. No performance. Just fact. She held his gaze for a second longer, then looked down at the mug again. The steam had faded, but the warmth remained. "Thank you," she said quietly. The words sounded unfamiliar in her own voice, like something she had not used in a while without it being followed by expectation. Elijah nodded once, accepting it without turning it into something larger. That was his way. Across the room, the clock ticked forward, each second marking the slow unraveling of a night that had started with tension and now leaned toward something steadier. Charlotte shifted slightly on the couch, her body finally allowing itself to rest against the cushions instead of hovering above them. The blanket slipped from her shoulders just enough to reveal the sharp line of her posture softening. It was small. Almost invisible. But it was there. Elijah noticed. He always noticed the small things. "You are not from around here," he said after a while, not as a question, but as an observation. Charlotte let out a faint breath that almost resembled a laugh, though it did not quite reach that far. "Is it that obvious?" Elijah tilted his head slightly. "You walked in like you were not used to asking permission," he said. "And you sat down like you were." The words landed gently, but they stayed. Charlotte looked at him again, really looked this time, like she was trying to understand how someone could see so much without asking anything in return. "I am usually the one people come to," she admitted after a pause. "Not the other way around." Elijah nodded slowly. "That gets heavy," he said. "Not a question. Not a judgment. Just understanding." Her fingers tightened slightly around the mug again, but this time not from fear. From something closer to release. "Heavier than people think," she replied. Silence returned, but it no longer felt empty. It felt shared. Outside, the rain had softened into a quiet drizzle, the kind that no longer demanded attention. Inside, the apartment held its shape, unchanged, but something within it had shifted. Charlotte leaned back fully against the couch now, the first time she had allowed her weight to rest without hesitation. Her eyes drifted once more to the drawing on the refrigerator, then to the hallway where the child slept. "She is lucky," Charlotte said softly, almost to herself. Elijah followed her glance, his expression unreadable for a moment, then gentler than before. "She reminds me every day," he said. "No more. No less." Charlotte lowered her gaze again, but the thought lingered. Not envy. Not regret. Something quieter. Something that had been missing long before tonight. The kind of absence that money could not name. The kind that only showed itself in rooms like this, where nothing was for sale, and nothing needed to be proven. The night stretched longer than either of them expected, not because of anything happening, but because nothing needed to. Charlotte had not moved much from the couch, but the way she sat had changed. Her shoulders no longer held that rigid line, and her hands, once wrapped tightly around the mug, now rested loosely in her lap, the empty cup set aside on the small table beside her. Elijah stood up after a while, moving quietly toward the closet near the hallway. He opened it just enough to reach inside and pull out a folded set of sheets, the fabric worn soft from use but clean, neatly kept. He carried them over and set them down at the edge of the couch without making a point of it. "Bathroom is down the hall," he said, his tone steady, practical. "There is a clean towel on the rack. You can take your time." Charlotte nodded, her eyes following his movements, not because she was unsure, but because she was not used to being in a place where everything was explained without expectation. She stood slowly, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders before letting it fall back onto the couch. For a second, she hesitated, as if deciding whether to speak again, but then she simply said, "All right," and walked toward the hallway. Elijah watched her pass, not in a way that lingered, just enough to make sure she knew where she was going. When the bathroom door closed softly behind her, he let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. The apartment returned to its quiet rhythm. He moved with quiet purpose, pulling the couch forward and unfolding the bed beneath it in a smooth motion, the metal frame sliding out with a soft click. He spread the sheets carefully, smoothing them with his hands, making sure the corners were tucked in just enough to stay in place. It was not perfection. It was care. When he finished, he stepped back, checking it once more, then dimmed the light in the living room further, leaving only a soft glow from the kitchen. The kind of light that does not demand attention, but offers comfort. Down the hall, he could hear the faint sound of running water, steady and controlled. Not rushed. Not frantic. Just someone taking a moment they had not been allowed before. Elijah leaned against the wall for a second, his head tilting slightly as he listened to the quiet of his home, making sure everything held together the way it always did. After a few minutes, the water stopped. The door opened softly. Charlotte stepped back into the hallway, her hair slightly damp, her face cleaner, the tension in her features softened but not gone. She had folded her coat over her arm now, no longer wearing it like armor. Elijah noticed that. He always noticed. "There is a spare shirt if you need it," he said, gesturing toward the chair where he had left a simple cotton hoodie earlier. She looked at it, then back at him, a faint pause passing between them. "Thank you," she said again, quieter this time, but more certain. She walked over and picked it up, running her fingers over the fabric briefly before pulling it on. It was too big for her, the sleeves extending past her wrists slightly, but she did not adjust them. She let it be. Elijah turned slightly away, giving her the space to settle without feeling observed. When she sat back down on the edge of the now-made bed, she looked different. Not because of the clothes. Because of what she had allowed herself to let go of. Just a little. "You can rest," he said, his voice lower now, almost blending into the quiet around them. "Nothing is going to happen here tonight." Charlotte looked at him for a moment, searching his face for something she had learned to expect from others. Doubt. Motive. Condition. She found none. Just steadiness. She nodded once and slowly lay back against the pillow, pulling the blanket up to her chest. Her eyes remained open for a moment longer, fixed on the ceiling, as if she was waiting for something to interrupt the calm. When nothing did, her breathing began to slow. Elijah moved back to his chair, sitting down with the same quiet presence he had held all night. He did not turn off the last light. He did not close his eyes. He simply stayed. Watching. Not her, but the space. The door. The rhythm of the room. And somewhere between one breath and the next, Charlotte finally closed her eyes, not because she was no longer afraid, but because for the first time in a long while, she believed she could sleep anyway. The night did not end so much as it softened into something quieter, something that no longer felt like it was pressing in from all sides. Elijah remained in the chair, his posture steady, his eyes open but not tense, the kind of alertness that did not come from fear but from responsibility. The clock moved past 3, then 4, each minute slipping by without urgency. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, leaving behind a stillness that settled over the street like a held breath finally released. Inside, the apartment held its warmth. Charlotte slept. Not deeply, not all at once, but enough. Her breathing came in slow, uneven rhythms at first, as if her body did not fully trust the quiet it had been given. Every so often, she shifted slightly under the blanket, her fingers tightening for a second before relaxing again. Elijah noticed each movement without turning his head. He did not watch her directly. He watched the room, the edges, the spaces where something could change. But nothing did. And after a while, even her breathing found its own rhythm, steady enough to signal that whatever had followed her to his door had not crossed the threshold. Around 5:30, the sky outside began to shift, the dark blue fading into something lighter, something that hinted at morning without fully committing to it. Elijah stood slowly, careful not to disturb the quiet, and walked into the kitchen. He moved with the same deliberate calm, filling the kettle again, setting it on the stove, the soft click of the burner igniting barely louder than a whisper. The routine was familiar. Grounding. The kind of small action that kept everything else in place. As the water warmed, he glanced toward the couch. Charlotte had not moved. The tension that had defined her when she arrived had eased, replaced by something more human, more vulnerable. The line between who she had been outside that door and who she was now had blurred in a way that did not need explanation. Elijah reached for a small notebook. On the counter, flipping it open to check the day ahead. School drop-off at 8. Work at 9. Pick up at 3. Groceries sometime in between. The rhythm of a life that did not pause just because the night had changed. He closed the notebook and set it aside. Behind him, there was a slight movement. Charlotte shifted, her eyes opening slowly, not with panic, but with the quiet confusion of someone waking in a place that does not match their memory. For a second, she did not move. She just looked at the ceiling, letting the room come back into focus piece by piece. The soft light. The unfamiliar walls. The absence of noise. Then she turned her head slightly and saw him in the kitchen. Elijah did not turn immediately. He gave her that moment, that space to recognize where she was without being pulled into conversation too quickly. When he did look over, his expression was the same as it had been all night. Steady. Unchanged. "Morning," he said simply. Charlotte blinked once, pushing herself up slowly, the blanket falling slightly from her shoulders before she pulled it back into place. "Morning," she echoed, her voice quieter than before, not from fear, but from the weight of waking up into something real. She glanced around the room again, this time with more awareness. The drawing on the refrigerator. The folded laundry on the chair. The small details she had noticed before now felt different in the daylight. More grounded. Less like something temporary. She swung her feet gently to the floor, pausing as if expecting something to rush back in. It did not. The quiet remained. She looked at Elijah again, studying him in the morning light, seeing not just the man who opened the door, but the one who had stayed awake to make sure nothing followed her inside. "You did not sleep," she said, not as a question. Elijah gave a slight shake of his head, reaching for a second mug as the kettle began to hum. "I have done it before," he replied. No explanation. No complaint. Just truth. Charlotte held his gaze for a moment longer, something unspoken passing between them. Not gratitude alone. Something deeper. Something that had not fully formed yet. She looked down at her hands, resting loosely now, no longer gripping anything. "I did not think I would sleep," she admitted quietly. Elijah poured the hot water into the mug, the steam rising in soft curls between them. "Sometimes," he said, setting it down within her reach, "you just need a place where nothing is trying to take something from you." Charlotte's fingers closed around the mug slowly, the warmth settling into her palms again. This time, she did not hesitate. This time, she believed him. The apartment slowly shifted into morning, not with noise, but with small, familiar sounds that belonged to a life already in motion. Elijah moved through the kitchen with quiet rhythm, opening a cabinet, pulling out a small box of pancake mix, setting it beside a worn mixing bowl. The stove clicked on again, the low flame steady beneath a flat pan that had seen years of use. He worked without rushing, measuring by instinct more than precision, the kind of practice that came from repetition done out of care rather than habit. Charlotte sat at the edge of the couch, the mug still in her hands, watching without making it obvious. The space felt different in daylight. Smaller, yes, but clearer. Honest. There was nothing here that pretended to be more than it was, and somehow that made everything feel more solid. From down the hallway, a soft sound broke through the quiet. A door creaked open just slightly, followed by the faint shuffle of small footsteps against the floor. Elijah turned his head before the second step landed. "Morning, Nia," he said gently, his voice softening in a way Charlotte had not heard before. A small figure appeared in the hallway, hair slightly messy, eyes still heavy with sleep. Nia paused when she saw Charlotte, her gaze curious but not afraid, the kind of openness only children carried without thinking. "Hi," she said simply, tilting her head a little. Charlotte blinked, caught off guard not by the child, but by the absence of hesitation in her voice. "Hi," she replied, her tone quieter, almost careful, like she was stepping into something unfamiliar. Nia walked a few steps closer, her attention shifting between Charlotte and the oversized hoodie she wore. "Is that Daddy's?" she asked, pointing lightly. Charlotte glanced down at the sleeves, then back at Elijah for half a second before answering. "Yes," she said, a small smile touching her expression without fully settling in. Nia nodded, satisfied with the answer, then turned toward the kitchen. "Are we having pancakes?" she asked, her voice lifting just enough to carry excitement. Elijah gave a small nod, flipping the first pancake with an easy motion. "We are," he said. "Go wash up." Nia disappeared back down the hallway without question, the rhythm of her morning already set. Charlotte watched the exchange, something in her expression shifting again. Not envy. Not longing. Something quieter. Something that recognized a pattern she had never lived inside. Elijah placed a plate on the counter, then another, setting the table with simple efficiency. No extra movement. No wasted steps. Everything had a place. Everything had a reason. Charlotte stood slowly, setting the mug aside, and moved toward the kitchen, drawn not by hunger, but by the quiet gravity of the moment unfolding in front of her. She stopped just short of the counter, leaving space between them, unsure of where she fit in this routine. Elijah glanced at her briefly, then slid a clean plate in her direction without comment. Not an invitation spoken out loud. Just inclusion. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then stepped closer, accepting it. When Nia returned, her hands still slightly damp, she climbed into her chair and looked between the two adults with open curiosity. "Are you staying for breakfast?" she asked Charlotte, as if it were the most natural question in the world. Charlotte paused, the simplicity of it catching her off guard again. She looked at Elijah for a moment, then back at Nia. "If that is okay," she said carefully. Nia shrugged, already reaching for a fork. "It is okay with me," she replied, as if that settled everything. Elijah placed the last pancake onto the plate and set it in the center of the table. No ceremony. Just food. Just morning. Charlotte took her seat slowly, the chair pulling in with a soft scrape against the floor. She looked down at the plate in front of her. Then around the small table, then at the man and child across from her. No phones. No interruptions. No one asking anything from her. Just a moment that existed without cost. And for the first time since she had stepped into this apartment, she did not feel like she was passing through. She felt like she was allowed to be there. The apartment settled into a quieter rhythm once the door closed behind them, the echo of small footsteps fading into the distance as morning fully took hold. Charlotte remained seated at the table for a moment longer, her hands resting loosely near the plate, her posture no longer guarded but not entirely at ease either. Something in between. Something shifting. Elijah moved calmly through the kitchen, rinsing dishes with practiced ease, the sound of running water soft and steady, filling the space without interrupting it. He did not rush. He never did. Charlotte watched him for a second, then lowered her gaze, her thoughts moving in a direction she could not ignore anymore. "You do this every day," she said quietly, not looking up yet. Elijah turned off the water and dried his hands, leaning lightly against the counter. "Most days," he replied. "Some are harder than others." Charlotte nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of the table without realizing it. "And you do it alone?" This time, Elijah did not answer right away. He glanced briefly toward the hallway, then back at her. "Not really," he said. "She is there. That makes it different." Charlotte lifted her eyes, following his earlier glance, as if she could still see the small presence that had just filled the room with something so effortless. "She trusts you," Charlotte said, more to herself than to him. Elijah gave a small nod. "She learns from what she sees," he replied. The words landed deeper than they sounded. Charlotte leaned back slightly in her chair, her shoulders relaxing in a way that felt unfamiliar. "People watch me too," she said after a moment. "They expect things. Decisions. Strength. Certainty." She paused, her expression tightening just slightly before softening again. "But no one is learning anything from me. They are just waiting." Elijah studied her for a second, not judging, not correcting. Just listening. "That sounds heavy," he said simply. Charlotte let out a quiet breath, something close to a release. "It is," she admitted. Silence returned, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like something was being understood without needing to be explained further. Charlotte looked around the apartment again, slower this time, noticing details she had missed before. The way everything had its place. The way nothing tried to impress. The way care showed itself in small, consistent ways instead of big gestures. "Why does this feel enough?" she asked, her voice lower now, almost careful. Elijah did not hesitate. "Because nothing here is trying to be more than it is," he said. Charlotte held that for a moment, letting it settle somewhere deeper than logic. She looked back at him, her expression no longer searching for answers, but beginning to recognize them. And for the first time since she arrived, she was not measuring what she was gaining or losing. She was simply noticing what was real. The apartment held a quiet that no longer felt unfamiliar, but it was not the same quiet as before. This one carried weight. Charlotte stood slowly from the table, her movements unhurried, as if she was giving herself time to understand what had changed and what had not. Elijah remained by the counter, not watching her directly, but aware of every shift in the room the way he always was. Charlotte walked toward the window again, drawn not by the view, but by the reflection waiting for her there. The morning light had grown stronger, outlining her clearly against the glass, removing the shadows that had softened her the night before. She looked at herself, not the version shaped by expectation, but the one standing here now, in borrowed clothes, in a place that asked nothing from her. Her phone sat where she had left it, silent, but present in a way that felt louder than any noise. She turned, her gaze moving between the window and the table, then finally settling somewhere in the middle. "I thought I understood what safety meant," she said quietly, her voice steady but not distant. Elijah did not move. He let her speak into the space. Without interruption. Charlotte continued, her eyes lowering for a second before lifting again. "I thought it was control. Structure. Being prepared for everything." She paused, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the table as if grounding herself. "But none of that stopped me from walking out last night." The words were not dramatic. They did not need to be. Elijah nodded once, not agreeing, not correcting. Just acknowledging. "Control keeps things in place," he said. "It does not always keep you safe." Charlotte let out a small breath, something softer this time, something closer to acceptance. She stepped away from the window, closer to the center of the room, her posture no longer divided between holding on and letting go. "Then what does?" she asked, not challenging, but searching for something she could carry with her. Elijah met her gaze, steady as always. "Knowing who will not use your worst moment against you," he said. Charlotte held his words for a second, then nodded slowly, as if something had finally settled into place. She walked back to the table and picked up her phone, her grip firm this time, not hesitant. She looked at it, not with urgency, but with clarity. Then she set it down again. Not because she was avoiding it. Because she was choosing when to face it. She looked at him again, her expression no longer guarded, no longer uncertain. Just clear. And in that quiet space, with nothing pressing in and nothing pulling her away, she realized that what she had found here was not something temporary. It was something she could not unsee. Something she would have to carry with her, no matter where she went next. Charlotte did not reach for her phone again. Not immediately. She let her hand rest at her side, her posture steady in a way that felt new but not uncomfortable. The room held its quiet, but now it felt like something that belonged to her as much as it did to him. She looked at Elijah, her eyes no longer searching for direction, but holding something firmer, something decided. "If I go back," she said slowly, her voice clear and grounded, "everything will move the same way it always has." Elijah nodded once, not interrupting. Not softening the truth. Charlotte continued, her gaze steady now. Meetings. Decisions. People waiting for answers. She paused, just long enough to let the weight of it settle without resisting it. "But I will not be the same inside it." The words were simple, but they carried something final. Elijah watched her for a moment, then gave a small nod. "That is how change works," he said. "The world does not shift first. You do." Charlotte let out a quiet breath, not heavy, not tense, just released. She stepped a little closer, not closing the distance entirely, but no longer standing apart from it either. "I do not want to lose this," she said, her voice softer now, but not uncertain. Elijah did not ask what she meant. He understood. He always did. "Then do not," he replied. "You already know what it feels like. That does not disappear." Charlotte held his gaze, something in her expression settling into calm instead of conflict. She nodded once, slow and certain. The decision did not need to be spoken again. It had already taken shape in the way she stood, in the way she breathed, in the way she no longer held herself like she had to protect something from being taken. Outside, the day continued, unchanged, unaware. Inside, the shift was quiet but complete. Charlotte turned slightly, her eyes moving once more across the apartment, taking in every detail as if she was committing it to memory. Not the objects. The feeling. The steadiness. The absence of pressure. Then she looked back at Elijah, her expression no longer divided between two worlds. "Thank you," she said. The words were simple, but this time they carried no hesitation, no formality, no distance. Elijah nodded once, accepting it the way he accepted everything else. No weight added. No need to respond beyond presence. Charlotte reached for her phone again, this time with intention. She picked it up, held it for a second, then slipped it into her bag. Not as something she was avoiding. As something she was ready to face. She moved toward the door, her steps calm, measured, not rushed. When she reached it, she paused for a brief moment, her hand resting on the handle. Not because she was unsure.